At precisely 1:23:45 a.m. on April 26, 1986, a catastrophic explosion ripped through Reactor 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant near Pripyat, Ukraine. This was not just any explosion, it was a disaster of unprecedented scale, one that would change the course of history and the future of nuclear energy. The blast, caused by a combination of design flaws and human error during a safety test, instantly destroyed the reactor core. The safety test, ironically intended to prevent such disasters, had gone horribly wrong. The core, a complex assembly of uranium fuel rods, control rods, and coolant channels, was obliterated in seconds. The explosion sent a plume of radioactive material soaring into the night sky. This plume, laden with deadly isotopes like iodine-131, cesium-137, and strontium-90, began to drift across Europe, carried by the winds. The night sky, once serene, was now a canvas of invisible death. The core, now exposed, began to burn uncontrollably, releasing even more deadly radiation into the atmosphere. The fire raged on for days, with firefighters and plant workers risking their lives to contain it. Their bravery, though heroic, came at a great cost, as many would later succumb to radiation sickness. The world watched in horror as the scale of the disaster unfolded, forever etching Chernobyl into history as a stark reminder of the devastating power of nuclear energy gone awry. News outlets around the globe broadcast images of the burning reactor, the evacuation of Pripyat, and the growing fear of radioactive contamination. The force of the explosion was felt for miles around, shaking buildings and waking residents from their sleep. People in nearby towns and villages were jolted awake, unaware that their lives were about to change forever. The initial shockwave was just the beginning of a long and painful ordeal. In the control room, operators stared in disbelief at their instruments, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what had just transpired. The dials and gauges, once familiar and reassuring, now displayed readings that were off the charts. Panic and confusion reigned as they tried to make sense of the chaos. The core, once the heart of a powerful energy source, was now a raging inferno, spewing invisible poison into the air. The fire, fueled by the reactor's graphite moderator, burned with an intensity that defied all efforts to extinguish it. The invisible poison, radioactive particles, began to settle on the ground, contaminating everything in its path. The explosion marked the beginning of a nuclear nightmare, one that would have far-reaching consequences for the environment, human health, and the future of nuclear power itself. The immediate area around Chernobyl became a radioactive wasteland, uninhabitable for thousands of years. The long-term health effects, including cancer and genetic mutations, would be felt for generations. The disaster also led to a re-evaluation of nuclear safety protocols worldwide, as the world grappled with the terrifying realization of what could happen when nuclear energy goes wrong. The initial moments following the explosion were a blur of confusion and disbelief. The night sky was illuminated by an eerie glow, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of burning materials. People in the nearby town of Pripyat were jolted awake by the blast, their minds struggling to comprehend the magnitude of the disaster unfolding before them. Inside the control room, operators struggled to make sense of the chaotic readings on their instruments. Alarms blared incessantly, and the once orderly environment descended into pandemonium. The operators, trained to handle emergencies, found themselves in uncharted territory, grappling with a situation that defied all their protocols and procedures. Many refused to believe that the reactor, touted as a testament to Soviet engineering, could have possibly exploded. The reactor was considered a marvel of modern technology, a symbol of Soviet prowess and ingenuity. The very idea that it could fail so catastrophically was unthinkable, a notion that many struggled to accept even as the evidence mounted before their eyes. Some bravely ventured out into the highly radioactive environment to assess the damage, their dosimeters quickly exceeding their maximum readings. These workers, aware of the deadly risks, pushed forward with a sense of duty and urgency. They knew that every second counted, and their actions in those critical moments would shape the course of the disaster response. Despite the imminent danger, plant workers sprang into action, desperately trying to contain the disaster. They worked tirelessly, often with inadequate protective gear, to stabilize the situation. Their efforts were hampered by the intense heat and radiation, but their resolve remained unshaken. They understood the gravity of the situation and the potential consequences of failure. Firefighters, unaware of the invisible threat they faced, arrived at the scene within minutes, battling the flames with water and foam. They were trained to fight fires, but nothing in their experience had prepared them for the unique challenges posed by a nuclear disaster. The radioactive smoke and debris added a layer of complexity and danger to their already perilous task. Their heroic efforts prevented the fire from spreading to the adjacent reactor buildings, a feat that likely averted an even greater catastrophe. The firefighters' quick thinking and bravery in the face of overwhelming odds played a crucial role in containing the disaster. Their actions bought valuable time for additional resources and personnel to be mobilized. However, their valiant efforts came at a terrible cost. The intense heat and radiation took a toll on their bodies, and many firefighters collapsed from exhaustion and injury. The scenes of devastation were a stark reminder of the high price paid by those on the front lines of the disaster response. Exposed to lethal doses of radiation, many firefighters would succumb to acute radiation sickness in the days and weeks that followed. The hospitals were soon overwhelmed with patients suffering from severe radiation burns and other symptoms. The medical staff, though dedicated and skilled, were ill-equipped to handle the sheer scale of the crisis. Their sacrifice, a testament to human courage in the face of unimaginable danger, bought precious time for others to begin the long and arduous task of containing the disaster. The bravery and selflessness displayed by the firefighters and plant workers during those initial hours would be remembered and honored for generations to come. Their actions not only mitigated the immediate impact of the explosion but also set the stage for the extensive cleanup and recovery efforts that would follow. As dawn broke over Pripyat, the true extent of the disaster became horrifyingly clear. A radioactive plume visible to the naked eye stretched high into the atmosphere. The Soviet government, initially slow to react, dispatched hundreds of thousands of people, later known as liquidators, to deal with the crisis. These brave individuals, many of them ordinary citizens with little or no prior experience in radiation safety, were tasked with a variety of dangerous jobs. They fought the persistent fires, decontaminated the surrounding area, and constructed a massive concrete sarcophagus to entomb the destroyed reactor. Miners from the Donbas region of Ukraine were brought in to dig a tunnel under the reactor. Their goal to create a space where a cooling system could be installed. This dangerous and grueling work was carried out under extreme conditions, with the constant threat of radiation exposure and collapsing debris. Section 4. Silence from Moscow, the government's delayed response. In the hours and days following the explosion, the Soviet government maintained a veil of secrecy. The initial response was marked by a conspicuous silence from Moscow, as officials grappled with the magnitude of the disaster. Initial reports downplayed the severity of the incident, and information about the true extent of the disaster was slow to emerge. The state-controlled media provided only sparse details, often minimizing the situation to avoid public panic. This lack of transparency sowed confusion and fear among the local population. Residents of Pripyat, the city closest to the Chernobyl power plant, were left in the dark about the real dangers they were facing. The government's decision to delay the evacuation of Pripyat, the city closest to the power plant, remains a point of contention. Despite the rising radiation levels, officials hesitated, fearing the political and social repercussions of a mass evacuation. It was not until 36 hours after the explosion that the order to evacuate was finally given, leaving residents exposed to dangerous levels of radiation for far too long. The delay in the evacuation order is often cited as a critical failure in the government's response. When the evacuation finally did begin, it was a chaotic affair. The residents of Pripyat were caught off guard, with little time to prepare for their sudden departure. Residents were told to pack only essential items and were assured that they would be able to return to their homes within a few days. This false assurance was given to prevent panic and maintain order, but it also meant that many left behind cherished possessions, believing they would soon return. Little did they know that they would never set foot in their homes again. The city of Pripyat, once a bustling community, became a ghost town overnight, frozen in time as a stark reminder of the disaster. In the days that followed, the Soviet government faced intense scrutiny both domestically and internationally. The delayed response and lack of transparency were heavily criticized, leading to a loss of trust in the authorities. Internationally, the Chernobyl disaster became a symbol of the dangers of nuclear power and the consequences of governmental secrecy. Countries around the world watched in horror as the true scale of the disaster unfolded. Scientists and experts worked tirelessly to understand the spread of radiation and its potential impact. The delayed response had allowed radioactive materials to disperse widely, affecting not just the immediate area but also neighboring countries. Today, memorials and tributes to the victims of Chernobyl stand as a testament to the lives lost and the enduring impact of the disaster. The government's delayed response remains a poignant reminder of the importance of transparency and swift action in the face of crisis. The abandoned city of Pripyat, overgrown and eerily silent, serves as a haunting legacy of the Chernobyl disaster. It stands as a stark reminder of the human cost of governmental failures and the enduring impact of the catastrophe. Section 5. The Exodus evacuating Pripyat and the surrounding areas. The evacuation of Pripyat, a city of nearly 50,000 people, began on the afternoon of April 27th. Residents, gathered at designated assembly points, were loaded onto buses and trucks and driven away from their homes, leaving behind almost everything they owned. The evacuation zone, initially a 30-kilometer radius around the plant, eventually expanded to encompass a much larger area. Thousands of people were displaced, their lives upended by the disaster. The sudden exodus left behind a haunting ghost town, a stark reminder of the human cost of the Chernobyl disaster.